Picture this: a crowded charity gala in Beverly Hills. Champagne glasses clinking. Camera flashes everywhere. Hollywood's elite mingling under crystal chandeliers. In one corner stands Jason Statham, action star, martial artist, the man who's made a career out of looking invincible on screen. He's holding court, telling stories, flexing that intimidating presence he perfected over decades of blockbuster films. And then, quietly, almost unnoticed, an older man walks in. Silver hair, weathered face, simple black suit, no entourage, no fanfare, just calm, dignified presence. Chucknorris, the real deal, a man who doesn't need to prove anything because his entire life has already done the talking. What happens next will remind everyone in that room, and everyone watching, that there's a universe of difference between playing a warrior and being one. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. And sometimes legends aren't made in Hollywood. They're earned in blood, sweat, and humility. This is that story. The Beverly Hilton's Grand Ballroom sparkled like a jewelry box that night. It was one of those events where ticket prices had more zeros than most people's bank accounts. A charity benefit for veterans organizations. Ironically enough, the guest list read like an action movie hall of fame. Sylvester Stallone chatting with donors near the silent auction, Jean-Claude Van Damme signing autographs by the bar, and of course Jason Statham, positioned strategically where the lighting hit him just right. Statham looked every bit the action hero he portrayed in countless films. At 57, he still maintained that granite physique, that coiled energy that suggested he could flip from charm to violence in a heartbeat. Tonight, he wore a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than a decent used car, and he knew exactly how good he looked in it. His third whiskey of the evening had loosened his tongue just enough to make him entertaining, but not enough to make him sloppy. He never got sloppy. The thing about fight choreography, he was saying to a circle of admirers, 2 studio executives, a sports journalist, and an Instagram influencer with 5 million followers, is making it look real without actually being real, is an art form. Most people couldn't tell the difference between a proper fighter and what we do on camera. He flashed that signature smirk, the one that had launched 1,000 movie posters. The group laughed appreciatively. One of the executives, a man named Richard with 2 white veneers and a Rolex that caught every light, raised his glass. "Come on, Jason. You're being modest. I've seen the training videos. You're the real thing." Statham's smile widened, but there was something sharp behind it. Pride, maybe, or the particular brand of confidence that comes from being constantly told you're extraordinary. "I train hard. Always have. Boxing, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, karate. I put in the work. But let's be honest," he leaned in conspiratorially. "Half these martial arts masters you see at events like this couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag. They're living off reputations built decades ago, when camera tricks were easier to hide behind." The journalist, eager for content, leaned forward. "Anyone specific you're thinking of?" It was meant to be a joke, a playful jab, entertainment for the evening. But there's a particular kind of arrogance that comes with believing your own mythology, and Statham had been breathing his own press for a very long time. "Well," he said, voice dropping to that theatrical stage whisper that somehow carried, "let's just say some of these older action guys, the ones from the 70s and 80s, they were great for their time. But their time has passed. Today's action stars actually train. We actually know what we're doing." It was at that precise moment that Chucknorris walked through the entrance. He didn't make an entrance in the Hollywood sense. There was no dramatic pause at the doorway, no waiting for heads to turn. He simply arrived, quietly checking in with the event coordinator, a man of 84 years moving with the calm, economical grace of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to protect, namely his dignity and the dignity of others. Chuck wore a simple black suit, American flag pin on his lapel, a subtle nod to his decades of military support work. His face showed every one of his years, lined with experience and weathered by time, but his eyes were clear, alert, present. He'd been teaching Tang Su Do for over 6 decades. He'd fought in real tournaments when tournaments meant something, when you could actually get hurt, before the sport became sanitized and commercialized. He'd served those who served, raising millions for veteran causes, never seeking the spotlight, just doing the work. He'd come tonight because they'd asked him to, and because the cause mattered, not for the cameras, not for the attention. He'd almost stayed home. These events exhausted him now, all the noise and performance. But duty had always meant something to Chucknorris. As he moved through the crowd, a few people recognized him. Gentle handshakes, warm smiles. He had that effect. His presence didn't demand attention. It invited respect. A veteran in a wheelchair stopped him, wanting to express gratitude for Chuck's foundation work. Chuck knelt down, taking his time with the conversation, genuinely listening as cameras stayed respectfully away. Across the room, Statham's circle had grown. Someone had mentioned Norris's arrival, and the journalist, sensing content gold, prod get further. Chucknorris is here tonight. Legendary guy, right? Statham's expression shifted, just slightly. The careful mask of charm developed a crack. Legendary at what? Internet memes. The group laughed, but it was nervous laughter now. Look, I respect what he did for action cinema back in the day. But let's be realistic. The man's 84 years old. He's a relic. Those old-school martial artists, they're all mystique and mythology. Put them in an actual situation today, and he made a dismissive gesture with his glass. The problem with speaking loudly in a room that's starting to quiet down is that your words travel farther than you intend. Several heads turned. The Instagram influencer's eyes went wide. This was going to be incredible content, but suddenly she wasn't sure she wanted to be associated with it. Stallone, who'd been watching from across the room, shook his head slightly. He knew what was coming. Sly had worked with both men. He understood the difference between confidence and wisdom, between playing tough and being tested by life itself. Chuck, finishing his conversation with the veteran, stood slowly. He'd heard his name mentioned, but not the context. He moved toward the bar to get a water. His doctor had been very clear about hydration, and his path, as fate would have it, took him directly past Statham's growing audience. The room had that peculiar energy now, the kind you feel before a thunderstorm. People were watching without wanting to be obvious about watching. Conversations continued, but they were hollow, distracted. Everyone was tracking 2 gravitational centers, the rising star holding court and the quiet legend moving through space like a shark through still water. Not predatory, just powerful and ancient and undeniable. Chuck noticed the crowd and initially moved to avoid it. He'd learned decades ago that crowds at these events wanted something from you, a photo, a story, validation. He was tired, and he'd already given what he came to give. But Richard, the executive with the expensive watch and the bad judgment, spotted him. Chucknorris, my God, come here. Richard's voice carried that false enthusiasm of networking events, loud enough to prevent polite escape. We were just talking about the old days of action cinema. Chuck smiled politely, changing direction with the gracious resignation of a man who'd been in the public eye for 6 decades. Richard, good to see you. His voice was soft, measured. After a lifetime of teaching martial arts, he'd learned that you don't need volume when you have presence. Chuck, you know Jason Statham, of course. Richard gestured expansively, making introductions as if he'd personally arranged this meeting of titans. The 2 men's eyes met. Statham extended his hand, smile still in place, but there was something challenging in his posture. The way he stood, weight slightly forward, chest out, it was the posture of a man establishing dominance. Chuck noticed he'd taught thousands of students. He could read body language the way most people read text messages. Jason, Chuck's handshake was firm but brief. Professional. Congratulations on all your success. Thanks, mate. Statham's British accent always got slightly stronger when he was performing. Big fan of your early work. Way of the Dragon, all those classics. Must be nice, living off that legacy. The words hung in the air like a slap that hadn't quite connected yet. The group around them went quiet. The Instagram influencer actually stopped recording. This felt like it might cross a line, and she'd built her brand on positivity. Chuck's expression didn't change. "I'm grateful for the opportunities one had," he said simply, "and grateful to still be healthy enough to train and teach." Still training? Statham's eyebrows rose with theatrical skepticism. That's dedication. Though I imagine it's different now, yeah? More gentle? Tai Chi, maybe? There it was. The condescension wrapped in fake interest. The journalist recognized it, tensing with predatory excitement. Stallone, across the room, started moving closer, but the crowd had thickened. Chuck took a slow breath. He'd dealt with challenging students before, young men who came to his dojo thinking they'd test the old master, prove something. He never needed to prove anything back. "I still practice Tang Soo Do," he said quietly. "Every morning. Same as I have for 65 years. Right. Statham took a sip of his whiskey, playing to his audience. "Tang Soo Do. That's Korean, yeah? Traditional stuff. Very historical." The way he said historical made it sound like outdated. "I've trained in more modern systems. Things that actually work in real combat situations. MMA-based practical applications. Not that traditional stuff is bad. It's just, it's more for show these days, isn't it?" The room was holding its breath now. A waiter froze mid-step, champagne bottle suspended. Someone's phone camera was definitely recording, despite the no social media policy. Chuck's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His hands, hanging relaxed at his sides, flexed once, a tell that only a trained observer would catch. He was considering his options. Walk away and let this arrogant child think he'd won? Engage and risk an ugly scene at a charity event? Jason. Richard laughed nervously, finally sensing he created a monster. Chuck's probably forgotten more about martial arts than most people ever learn. "Oh, I don't doubt he knew his stuff back in the day," Statham continued, and now there was no mistaking the edge in his voice. The whiskey, the audience, the years of being told he was invincible, all combined into a toxic confidence. But fighting evolves. What worked in the 70s doesn't cut it now. It's like comparing a Model T to a Tesla. Both are cars, but one's going to win every time. He turned slightly, addressing the broader crowd now, enjoying the spotlight. These old masters, they're great for movies, great for motivation posters. But in a real situation, against someone who actually trains in modern combat systems. He shook his head, smiling. It'd be over in seconds. Chuck was very still. The kind of still that comes before movement. The way a cat goes still before it strikes. Those who knew him, really knew him, recognized the stillness. It was the opposite of hesitation. It was readiness. "Is that right?" Chuck's voice was quieter now, which somehow made it carry further. "Absolutely." Statham finished his whiskey, riding high on his own performance. "No disrespect, Chuck. You were great for your era, but your era's over. The new generation," he gestured himself with the empty glass, "we're faster, stronger, better trained. That's just evolution. The thing about respect is that it's built slowly, over years of consistent action, but it can be dismantled in moments by careless words and arrogant posturing." What Statham didn't understand, what he couldn't understand, because he'd never been tested outside of choreographed sequences and stunt coordinators, was that Chucknorris wasn't offended for himself. He'd faced down his own ego decades ago in dojos where losing meant broken bones and humiliation. He'd learned humility the hard way, which is the only way it really sticks. No, Chuck was offended on behalf of every martial artist who'd ever dedicated their life to the art rather than the fame. Every instructor who taught for love of teaching rather than Instagram followers. Every practitioner who understood that martial arts was about discipline, character, and the protection of others, not ego and performance. You know what? Chuck's voice was still soft, but it had changed quality. There was steel underneath now. You might be right. Maybe I am just a relic, trading on old glories and internet jokes. Statham's smile widened. He thought he'd won. But, Chuck continued, I propose something, just to satisfy curiosity. He looked directly at Statham now, and his eyes had the flat, calm assessment of a man who'd actually been in combat, who'd actually faced down threats when the choreography went wrong, when the stakes were real. A simple demonstration. Nothing dramatic. Just a basic exchange. You and me. Let these folks see what you mean about modern training versus traditional. The room's energy shifted instantly. Someone gasped. Richard went pale. Gentlemen, this is a charity event. Let's not. I'm not talking about a fight, Chuck clarified, his voice reasonable. Just a demonstration. One technique. Clean, controlled. If I'm as outdated as you suggest, it won't take long to prove it. And if I'm not, he shrugged slightly, well, maybe there's value in the old ways after all. Statham's face had frozen. His publicist, materializing from somewhere in the crowd, grabbed his elbow. Jason, don't. This is not. We should go. But it was too late. The crowd was watching. Phones were definitely out now, policy be damned. And Statham had spent his entire career building an image of fearlessness, of capability, of being a legitimate tough guy in a world of pretenders. To walk away now, from an 84-year-old man, after he just finished mocking that man's legacy, his ego wouldn't allow it. And that was his fatal mistake. You're serious? Statham laughed, but it didn't sound quite right anymore. Chuck, you're 84. I don't want to hurt you. I appreciate the concern. Chuck's tone was perfectly neutral, but I'm willing to take that risk. The question is, are you? It was a trap, and Statham walked right into it. Fine. Sure. Why not? He handed his empty glass to someone, rolled his shoulders. His movements were showy, designed for cameras. He was still performing. But we should probably take this outside to the patio. More room. Safer. The patio works, Chuck agreed. The crowd moved like a living thing, flowing toward the French doors that led to the hotel's expansive veranda. Someone had the presence of mind to notify security, but the security team, seeing who was involved, decided to observe rather than intervene. After all, both men were adults. Both were trained. And truthfully, even the security personnel wanted to see how this played out. The Beverly Hills night was cool and clear, city lights spreading out below like a circuit board of dreams and desperation. The patio was large, stone-tiled, with elegant planters and strategic lighting that made everyone look like they were in a movie, which, in a way, they were. A space cleared naturally, people forming a rough circle. Van Damme, having heard the commotion, appeared at the edge of the crowd, his face concerned. He caught Chuck's eye and made a questioning gesture. You okay? Need backup? Chuck gave the tiniest shake of his head. I'm good. Stallone pushed through to Richard. Stop this. Right now. I can't, Richard whispered back. It's too late. If I stop it now, Jason looks like a coward. Better a coward than a cautionary tale, Stallone muttered, but he didn't move to intervene. Part him. The part that had worked with the old guard and the new, that understood the difference between movie fighting and real fighting. Want to see this play out. Someone needed to learn a lesson tonight. In the center of the space, Chuck removed his suit jacket, handing it to a nearby waiter who accepted it with the solemnity of a man receiving a sacred relic. Underneath, Chuck wore a simple white dress shirt. He rolled up his sleeves methodically, precisely. His forearms were lean, corded with muscle, and marked with the faint scars of a lifetime of training. No tattoos, no decoration. Just a map of a warrior's life written in old injuries and maintained strength. Statham was stretching ostentatiously, bouncing on his toes, showing off flexibility and conditioning. He looked good, objectively, phenomenally fit for a man his age. His movements were fluid, practiced, the result of excellent training and genetic blessing. He looked like a fighter. Chuck just stood quietly, hands at his sides, breathing steadily. He looked like a man waiting for a bus. And that, more than anything else, should have warned Statham what was coming. In Chuck's mind, as he watched Statham perform his pre-fight routine, memories flickered like old film footage. He was back in Korea, 1958, stationed at Osan Air Base as a young air policeman, lonely, uncertain, searching for someone to fill the empty hours. He'd walked into a Tang Soo Do Dojang, a small, plain room that smelled of sweat and discipline, and his life had changed forever. He remembered Master Jae Chul Shin, who'd beaten humility into him along with technique. Chuck hadn't been humble then. He'd been a cocky American serviceman who thought his size and strength would carry him through. Master Shin had disabused him of that notion with painful efficiency, over and over, until Chuck learned that martial arts wasn't about being tough. It was about being teachable. He remembered his first real tournament, hands shaking, heart pounding, facing opponents who'd trained since childhood. He'd lost more than he'd won in those early days. Each loss had been a teacher, each victory a responsibility. He'd learned that winning didn't make you superior. It made you a temporary guardian of the art, obligated to pass it on correctly. He remembered opening his own schools, teaching thousands of students over the decades. Some became champions. Most became better people. That was always a real victory. Watching a troubled kid find discipline, a bullied teen find confidence, a lost adult find purpose. The martial arts had given him that, and he'd spent his life giving it to others. He remembered the movie career, which had come later, almost accidentally. He'd never sought Hollywood. It had found him, and he'd used it as a platform, nothing more. A way to show that good guys could be strong, that heroes could be humble, that real power didn't need to prove itself constantly. Sure, the movies were stylized, choreographed, enhanced. But the principles underneath were real. The discipline was real. The philosophy was real. And he remembered moments, just a few, scattered across decades, when the training had stopped being theoretical. A mugger in a parking lot in the 80s, who thought the aging action star would be an easy target. Chuck had disarmed him without throwing a single strike, just redirected the knife and controlled the man until police arrived. A drunk causing trouble in one of his schools, threatening students. Chuck had removed him with minimal force and maximal efficiency, then called him a cab. These weren't movie moments. There were no cameras, no dramatic scores. Just an old man who'd practiced 10,000 kicks so many times that his body knew what to do before his brain finished a thought. Muscle memory carved so deep it was practically genetic. Back in the present, Statham was still stretching. "So how do we do this?" he asked, and Chuck could hear the false bravado. The actor was nervous now, starting to realize he might have made a mistake. What are the rules? Simple. Chuck said, "You attack however you want. Use whatever technique feels natural to you. I'll respond with one move. Just one. If it works, we're done. If it doesn't, you win, and I'll happily admit you were right about everything." Statham's eyes narrowed. One move? That's it. That's it. It was perfect, really. If Chuck succeeded, Statham could claim it was a lucky shot. If Chuck failed, Statham's ego would be satisfied, and the evening could end. It was an out, graciously offered, a way to save face. But Statham, riding the adrenaline in the audience and 3 whiskeys worth of courage, didn't take it. "Your funeral, old man." The crowd winced. Even his own publicist closed her eyes. Chuck just nodded. "Whenever you're ready." Statham took his stance, a modern mixed martial arts posture, weight distributed well, hands up in a loose guard. It was actually a good stance, the product of genuine training and natural athleticism. He circled once, twice, getting his distance. The crowd was utterly silent. Someone's phone light caught the scene, making it look staged, cinematic, unreal. And then Statham moved. To his credit, It was fast. A crisp jab to gauge distance, then a step-in with a powerful right cross aimed at Chuck's jaw, followed by a low leg kick. It was a proper combination, the kind you'd see in a legitimate fight, mixing levels, designed to overwhelm. But Chuck wasn't there. What happened next took approximately 1.3 seconds. Though to everyone watching it seemed to exist outside of normal time, a moment stretched like taffy, simultaneously too fast to follow and impossibly slow. Chuck's movement was so economical, so practiced, that it looked effortless. As Statham's cross came in, Chuck shifted his weight, not back, but laterally and slightly forward, a 45-degree angle that moved his head precisely 4 inches out of the punch's trajectory while simultaneously closing distance. It was a Tang Soo Do principle he'd practiced 10,000 times. Don't retreat from power, redirect it. Statham's punch sailed past Chuck's ear, overextending slightly because there was no impact to stop its momentum. In that fraction of a second, Chuck's left hand came up, not to block but to guide, a light touch on Statham's extended arm that furthered his rotation, pulling him slightly off balance. And then Chuck kicked. It wasn't a Hollywood kick with dramatic chamber and telegraph power. It was a fundamental front snap kick. AP Chajai, the first kick beginners learn and masters perfect. His rear leg came up, knee raising, foot extending in one smooth motion, powered by hip rotation, and 6 decades of muscle memory. The ball of Chuck's foot struck Statham's solar plexus with surgical precision, not hard enough to break ribs or cause real injury. Chuck had perfect control, which was a point, but hard enough to completely empty Statham's lungs, to override his diaphragm's functioning, to send a shock wave through his entire system. Statham's eyes went wide. His mouth opened in a silent O. Every molecule of air evacuated his body. His hands dropped from their guard position, moving instinctively to his chest. And then, inevitably, because physics doesn't care about reputation or box office numbers, his legs buckled. He went down, not dramatically, not like in the movies, with a backwards fall and a thud. He just dropped, knees hit the stone patio, then hands, and he stayed there, a human table, trying desperately to remember how breathing worked. The crowd gasped collectively. Someone screamed. Phones captured everything. Chuck's foot returned to ground, his stance settling back to neutral, as if nothing had happened. He wasn't even breathing hard. He'd moved with the effort most people use to sweat a fly, minimal, efficient, effective, for 5 long seconds. The only sound was Statham's desperate wheezing as his diaphragm slowly remembered its job. Chuck waited patiently, not moving to help or gloat, just present. The kick had been a lesson, not a punishment. Finally, air returned to Statham's lungs in a huge, rasping gasp. He sucked in breath like a drowning man breaking the surface, coughing, eyes watering. He stayed on his hands and knees, head down, pride and oxygen both in short supply. Chuck knelt beside him. Not quickly, his 84-year-old knees protesting the movement, but he managed it. Breathe slowly, he said quietly, placing a hand on Statham's shoulder. Your diaphragm seized. It'll pass. Just take your time. Statham nodded, still unable to speak, humiliation flooding in as oxygen returned. Around them, the crowd remained frozen. No one quite knew what to do. Applaud? Help? Film? Van Damme and Stallone moved forward simultaneously, flanking the pair. Van Damme helped Chuck stand back up, which Chuck accepted with a grateful nod. Stallone crouched next to Statham, gripping his shoulder. You good, brother? Statham nodded again, finally getting enough air to sit back on his heels. His face was red from oxygen deprivation, from exertion, from shame. When he looked up at Chuck, his expression was complex. Embarrassment, certainly, but also something else. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. How? His voice was rough, damaged. He cleared his throat, tried again. How did you do that? Chuck retrieved his jacket from the still-frozen waiter, sliding it back on with the same methodical care he'd used to remove it. 65 years of practice. He said simply, That kick is the first one I learned. I've probably thrown it 1,000,000 times. Maybe more. He paused, buttoning his jacket. You're right about one thing. You're faster than me. Stronger, probably. Better conditioned. But you've trained for 15, maybe 20 years. I've trained for 65. That's the difference. Statham was getting to his feet now, with Stallone's help. His suit was dusty, his hair mussed, his ego thoroughly deflated. I'm sorry, he managed, and to his credit. He sounded like he meant it. I was an arrogant ass. You were? Chuck agreed, without malice. But you're young. You'll learn. If you're smart, you'll learn that martial arts isn't about being better than anyone else. It's about being better than you were yesterday. Every day. For your whole life. He extended his hand. Statham looked at it for a long moment, then clasped it firmly. This handshake was different from the first one. Honest, respectful, earned. Thank you, Statham said quietly, for not actually hurting me. You could have. That's not what martial arts is for. Chuck released his hand, gave a small nod. It's for protecting people, including protecting arrogant action stars from their own egos. A small smile ghosted across his face. Your movies are good, by the way. You do excellent work. Just remember, it's work. It's performance. The real thing is different. Quieter. Less flashy. More painful. The crowd, sensing the moment was ending, began to react. Applause started, hesitant at first, then building. Not mocking, but genuine. They'd witnessed something rare. A real lesson, delivered with precision and grace. The rest of the evening unfolded in strange, subdued fashion. The incident had shifted something fundamental in the room's atmosphere. Conversations continued, but they were gentler. People smiled more. The younger action stars in attendance found themselves gravitating toward the older ones, asking questions, listening more carefully. Chuck spent 20 minutes talking with a group that included Van Damme, Stallone, and now a very quiet Statham. They discussed training methods, philosophy, the difference between stage combat and traditional martial arts. Statham asked intelligent questions. His earlier arrogance completely evaporated. He'd been humbled, truly humbled, and it looked good on him. The thing is, Chuck explained, sitting now because his knees really were hurting. 84-year-old knees do not enjoy sudden kicks, even perfectly executed ones. Martial arts was never meant to be flashy. The original purpose was self-defense and personal development. The movies, the sport competitions, the social media demonstrations, those came later. They're not bad, but they're not the core. The core is discipline, practice, humility, making yourself a little better, a little more controlled, every single day. Van Damme nodded vigorously. This is what I try to tell young fighters. The flexibility, the high kicks, the splits, good for movies, good for show. But real fighting, he made a low, compact gesture. Small movements, efficient, like Chuck showed. Stallone, who'd been mostly quiet, finally spoke. I learned early on, had to learn, that there's a difference between looking like a fighter and being one. I've worked with a lot of tough guys. Real tough guys like Chuck, like some of the military advisors on my films. They're nothing like their movie versions. They're quieter, more thoughtful. They don't need to convince anyone of anything. Statham listened, really listened. His publicist hovered nearby, terrified this would all end up on social media. And of course it would. It already had, but trying to calculate how to spin it. The truth was, there was no spin needed. Sometimes a man gets humbled, and if he handles it with grace, it makes him more human, more relatable. I've been in my own head, Statham admitted, believing my own hype, thinking because I've trained hard and done my own stunts that I understood what real fighting was about. Tonight, show me I've got a lot to learn. That's the first step, Chuck said gently. Understanding you don't know everything. I'm 84 and I'm still learning. Last week, my instructor, he smiled at their surprised faces. Yes, I still have an instructor, a 7th-degree black belt who's 62. He showed me an improvement in my knife hand strike I'd never considered. After 65 years. That's the journey. It doesn't end. Around them, the charity gala was winding down. The incident had overshadowed the official program, but in a strange way, it served the event's purpose better than any speech could have. The cause was supporting veterans, and what Chuck had demonstrated, discipline, control, the application of training under pressure, was the very essence of military values. Several veterans in attendance approached Chuck to shake his hand, tell him he'd represented them well. One older veteran, the man in the wheelchair Chuck had spoken with earlier, rolled up slowly. "Mr. Norris, I just wanted to say thank you, not just for tonight, though that was something, but for everything you've done for us over the years, for remembering that some of us are still fighting battles, just different kinds." Chuck knelt again, ignoring his protesting knees, so he could be eye level with the man. "Thank you for your service. Truly, everything I've been able to do, I do because men and women like you gave me the freedom to do it." The veteran's eyes were wet. They shook hands, a long moment of shared understanding, and then Chuck stood, with Van Damme's help this time, no shame in accepting support, and the veteran rolled away, satisfied. The viral video started hitting social media before the event even ended. Multiple angles, multiple perspectives. Chucknorris destroys Jason Statham. Action star humiliated by 84-year-old. One kick-in career. The headlines are sensational, but the videos themselves told a more nuanced story. You could see Statham's arrogance in the early footage, his dismissive body language. You could see Chuck's quiet dignity. And then you could see the moment of truth, the impossibly fast kick, the collapse, the immediate aftermath where Chuck helped rather than gloated. But more than that, if you watched closely, you could see the transformation. Statham on his knees, humbled. Statham standing, apologizing. Statham listening, learning. By the end of the available footage, he looked like a different person. Less cocky, more human. Better. The comment sections were predictably wild. Chucknorris memes multiplied exponentially. Chucknorris doesn't do push-ups. He pushes the earth down. When Chucknorris does a roundhouse kick, he really does it. Jokes upon jokes upon jokes. But underneath the humor, there was something else. Respect. Genuine admiration for a man who'd proven that age is just a number when you put in the work, that humility is strength, that real warriors don't need to brag. Statham's team worked through the night on damage control, but by morning they realized damage control wasn't needed. Yes, Jason had been humiliated, but he'd also been gracious in defeat, humble in learning. Public opinion was shifting in his favor, not because he'd won, but because he'd lost with dignity and shown willingness to grow. Chuck, for his part, went home that night and did what he always did. Spent time with his wife Gina, prayed before bed, and set his alarm for 5:30 a.m. Because morning training was sacred and humbling arrogant. Movie stars didn't change that. The discipline continued, regardless of circumstances. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at Chucknorris's home in Texas. Inside was a handwritten letter on expensive stationery and a gift. A first edition of Bruce Lee's Tao of Jeet Kune Do, with a personal inscription from Lee to Chuck visible on the first page. It was worth thousands of dollars. The letter was from Jason Statham. "Chuck," it read, in surprisingly elegant handwriting. "I've been thinking a lot about that night. Not about the kick itself, though my solar plexus reminds me whenever I breathe deeply, but about what you said afterward, about practice, about humility, about making yourself better every day. I've started training differently, not just the physical aspects, but the philosophical ones. I found a traditional martial arts school here in London, Shotokan Karate, been running since the 60s. The instructor is 72 years old and moved like water when he demonstrated for me. He reminds me of you. I wanted to apologize again, properly, without an audience. What I said that night was disrespectful, Not just to you, but to every martial artist who's dedicated their life to the art rather than the performance. I confuse the map with the territory, as they say. I confuse knowing about fighting with understanding fighting. The book is from my personal collection. Bruce Lee gave it to you, and I found it at an estate sale years ago. Never knew it was yours. It should go back to you. It belongs with someone who understands what it really means. Thank you for the lesson. I'm still learning from it. With respect and gratitude, Jason. Chuck read the letter twice, then showed it to Gina. She smiled, the way she always did when her husband's better nature was reflected back at him. "You gonna respond?" she asked. "Of course." Chuck set the letter down carefully. He took the lesson to heart. That's rare. Most people get humbled and then spend years making excuses, explaining it away. Jason owned it and changed. That takes courage. He wrote back that afternoon, a shorter note, but equally sincere. He thanked Jason for the book, for the apology, for the willingness to grow. He recommended some additional reading, not just martial arts texts, but philosophy, meditation, character development. And he invited Jason to visit sometime, to train at his ranch. No cameras, no audience. Just two martial artists sharing knowledge. 3 months after that, Jason Statham posted a photo on Instagram. It showed him in a traditional dojang, white GI with a white belt, sitting in meditation position among a class of students. The caption read, "Day 1. Again. Sometimes you need to empty your cup to refill it properly. Grateful for lessons learned and teachers who cared enough to deliver them. Hashtag martial arts, hashtag humility, hashtag always a student." The post went viral, but for different reasons than the fight videos had. People respected the vulnerability, the acknowledgement of needing to start over. Comment sections filled with stories of others who'd been humbled, who'd learned hard lessons, who discovered that true strength comes from admitting weakness. Chucknorris never sought attention for what happened that night. He didn't give interviews about it, didn't write articles, didn't try to leverage it for publicity. He just continued his routine. Morning training, teaching, charity work, time with family. The discipline that had defined his life for 65 years continued unchanged. But the story spread anyway, the way important stories do. It became a parable in martial arts schools, a teaching moment about the difference between performance and practice. Instructors use it to remind students that flashy techniques matter less than fundamental excellence, that ego is the enemy of growth, that the quietest person in the room might be the most dangerous. Because here's the truth that Chucknorris understood and Jason Statham learned that night. Real strength doesn't announce itself. Real skill doesn't need validation. Real warriors, the ones who tested themselves against the hardest opponent themselves, who practiced not for glory but for growth, who've learned that martial arts is about protection rather than domination. These warriors don't need to prove anything. They're the elderly Asian man doing Tai Chi in the park who could probably dismantle an attacker with minimal effort. They're the quiet instructor who's never bragged about their tournament wins because they stopped competing to focus on teaching. They're the grandparent who's been practicing the same kata for 40 years and still finds new depth in its movements. They're the people who understand that true mastery is a relationship with practice itself, not with outcomes. That discipline is its own reward. That humility isn't weakness. It's the foundation of all real strength. Jason Statham plays warriors on screen and does it well. He trains hard, works diligently, brings real athleticism to performances. There's honor in that. But Chucknorris is a warrior in the truest sense. Not because he can kick, though he can, but because he spent his entire life in service to something larger than himself. The art, the students, the philosophy, the discipline. And on that night in Beverly Hills, he taught a lesson that no movie ever could, that legends aren't made in Hollywood. They're forged in 10,000 repetitions of the same basic technique, in sweat and sore muscles, and the decision to show up every single day, in the choice to remain humble when arrogance would be easier, in the discipline to use power responsibly when you could use it destructively. Chuck Norris went home that night and set his alarm for 5:30 a.m. because the work continues. Always remember this. The loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest. The most dangerous opponent is the one who has nothing to prove and everything to protect. And true mastery isn't about defeating others. It's about defeating your own ego, your own limitations, your own yesterday self. Real warriors walk quietly, but when they move, the earth remembers. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes permanent. And 65 years of permanent adds up to something no amount of talent or youth can overcome.